This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, MICHAEL COVEL. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. Ever since 1996, my life has been remote, meaning I can be anywhere. I did not always take advantage of that. I sure as hell do now. So when I get the chance to have the conversation with the good Harvard Business School professor, in this case, that would be Professor Tsedal Neeley, and today we are talking remote work. It's a revolution. And she calls it that in her book, The Remote Work Revolution. But like I said, I feel like I've been there for a long time. I've been at the remote work revolution. It's part of my life. But then again, sometimes we all might be a little bit ahead of the curve on something, some other issue. There's always somebody that's ahead on something. So I'm not trying to toot my own horn or say that I'm all that. But I am forever grateful that I get the opportunity to dive into a subject like this, remote work, with a Harvard Business School professor. We cover a wide range of material today. I think ultimately we come down on the same side of the page when it comes to remote work. The horse is out of the barn and it's running and it can't be stopped. The only debate is what happens? What happens when the remote work revolution fully takes place? Join me today as I discuss that very issue with Tsedal Neeley. And oh, by the way, if you're not yet on the remote work revolution train, what in blazes is wrong with you? Get a move on. It's time to go. I'll take you back in time to, I was 26, 27, 28 when Netscape went public. I just got out of grad school in mid-1994 when the AOL disks were flying around. I remember thinking once all this hit, I was like, why are all of these office buildings in the Tysons Corner, Virginia area going to be needed? I'm thinking of this in 1995. All these office buildings are going to go away. They're all going to go away. No one's going to use them. And then what happened? A building boom. So now here we are in 2021, and now you're saying to me what I thought all along. Now, I guess I've been out, I'm in Saigon, as I just told you. So I've clearly been working at a different thinking than a lot of people for a long time. What drove you, and when did you first come into the idea that work, as we commonly knew for a century, I guess, since the start of the Industrial Revolution, when did you first come into the idea or the thinking for yourself where you were like, wow, as much as possible, everything's going to be remote?
It's interesting because for me, almost 20 years ago, when I started a PhD program, I was convinced that technology was going to change the nature of work. I was convinced that global work, virtual work, distributed workforces were going to be increasingly important. But I never in my lifetime imagined what we witnessed March 2020 in the US and earlier in some parts of the world, later in other parts of the world, where the majority of workforces would have to migrate to their homes and away from their offices because of a global pandemic. The scope, the scale, the magnitude is one that I never imagined would happen all at once and to this extent. I always expected some form of distributed and virtual work to be part of workforces, but this is beyond expectation. I'm talking every corner of the world went remote.
It is an interesting trigger. I can't say that I've felt it because of COVID. I've not been to the States It will be 2 years in April. That's the longest I've ever been out of the States. I've not felt it. And that's the weird thing. I guess since I've been the digital entrepreneur since 1995, 1996, I've not felt this thing. And so I haven't been in the States to even feel it. I can feel a lot of angst coming from the States, but it's interesting to hear you say it so clearly. As you lay that out, my first thought becomes, there ain't no putting that genie back in the bottle.
I agree with you 100%. Listen, the virtualization of work is here. The virtualization of medicine is here. The virtualization of education is here. The virtualization of careers here. You're right. It's the kind of thing where once organizations and leaders have experienced it, they're saying, wow, this can actually work. Our productivity has gone up, not down. This is what you hear. Productivity has gone up, not down. We don't need these bloated travel budgets any longer. Oh, wow. Look, people can even experience job satisfaction in the state. But the thing about it is, there's been a number of surveys conducted, and they keep coming pretty regularly in the last few months. And what you end up seeing is when employees are asked, how do you want the future to look like? How much remote work do you want in your arrangement? Up to 70%, I'm giving you metadata here, across surveys, across polls, about 70% say they want to retain some form of remote work in their professional lives, meaning 1 day, 2 days, 3 days per week at work. When you talk to leaders and organizations, that number is flipped. Some 68% say we want people back. There's this paranoia that if we don't have people here, if we can't keep an eye on our culture, things are going to fall apart. We've just been surviving. But they have to reconcile the desires of the employees and their own fears and anxieties if they are to retain some of the top talents in their own organizations. I don't think remote work is going back. It's going to be part of our future repertoire.
Let's wrap it up as a side tangent really quick to cause all of the people that just imagine themselves fitting into the narrative that you just laid out. Let me throw a monkey wrench at that. If I go to the track in Saigon, Vietnam, and I go out there and run sprints or whatnot, often random young Vietnamese will come up to me. And the first thing I tell them, often their English is not that great. Sometimes there's some folks that are pretty good. But I'll tell them, I say, look, you guys pick up English, you're going to own the world, because when you take this ethic that you see across China, Vietnam, etc., and you add English, which is kind of what the Philippines have done, it's game on. I mean, I'll give you one quick example too, and I'll let you comment. I've got a Filipino VA. I've never met her. We've done some videos, conversations and stuff, but pretty much she's on autopilot. She knows what to do and she does it and she's happy. She is 60 to 70% less money for me as the boss guy, and she does twice the work of the American VA she replaced.
Unbelievable.
Game on, Americans. Game on. Not only is digital here, I mean, I'll take it a step further. I want you to clarify some of the companies that perhaps want them back, because there's got to be some of them that are thinking exactly what I'm just saying, which is like, wow, we've now got an opportunity to change our labor costs and perhaps get more productivity.
Absolutely. Listen, as much as there are companies that are saying we want people back, we're worried about our culture, there are just as many, if not more, that are saying we want to make this a permanent fixture in our workforce. I'm talking about the tech companies like Twitter, like Dell, and even Dropbox and others that are now declaring that they want to be a virtual first company. So you have both of those, but you're so right. The labor pool has opened up in extraordinary ways for many companies when they're saying, we want the best talent wherever they are, and we don't need to worry about physical location or bringing them here to Boston if their lives and families are in Minnesota. We just want that person as part of our organization. And we know that this remote work works. When it comes to talent pool, if the organizations that are worried don't adopt this, they're going to lose out. There's no doubt in my mind when it's available everywhere else. And about the English thing, I spent many years looking at English as a lingua franca or a business language. Look at the force that India has become because English is a prominent, a dominant language. Once you get that language across borders that is shared and can be used for business, you're right. We don't need to limit ourselves to locations when we're looking for talent.
India has come online, at least I can see across my business. India has come online in the last 2, 3, 4 years like no tomorrow. India is absolutely going crazy. Bigger population than China, I believe now. Like you said, the English, watch out for India. Quick question. I'm a ex-baseball player. If you were to put this in baseball terms, first inning, 9 innings, we've got to be like, have we even started the game when it comes to remote work? Are we in the first inning? I don't think we're anywhere. What do you think?
I think we've been surviving thinking that we're in a liminal or transitional state for the last year. My book comes out at the end of this month at the 1-year anniversary when most people have been experimenting with this remote work. Having talked to so many people in the last year, people are just kind of holding on, not adopting or employing the best practices that will allow them to thrive. So you're right. We are just getting started, but I'm here to say that it's time to learn the skills, the best practices, the competencies to enable individuals, managers, and organizations to thrive in a remote environment.
Let me keep you at best practices for 1 second. We're using Zoom right now. If someone's listening, okay, that's great. At least you figure out how to listen to a podcast. You're zooming along right there. But in terms of best practices, it starts with the communication tool. And Zoom is probably winner, chicken dinner as of right now.
Listen, I actually think that these various digital tools that I talk about extensively are not just communication tools, they are work tools. We need to think of them as work tools, meaning how do I accomplish work using the various digital tools that are available? Some are synchronous, some are asynchronous, some are lean, some are rich. Which ones do I need to get work done? I'll give you an example. If you're trying to have people process complex information. You want to do it in writing in an asynchronous format that people can just sit and consume and process. You don't want to do that in a call because people will miss a lot. On the other hand, if you want to do some simple coordination, or if you have some complex coordination to do, you may think about synchronous versus asynchronous, lean and or rich media. So you have to be really thoughtful about what you use and how you use it. And yes, I am a big fan of Zoom. In fact, Eric Yuan, the CEO of Zoom, has wonderfully endorsed my book, which is unusual. You don't see his endorsements everywhere. So I was so thrilled.
There's kind of a scratch there. It's kind of good for him, right? I mean, you're talking about remote work. He is Mr. Remote, right?
There's so many things out there that are remote related. He doesn't have to scratch here. He can not even scratch at all and he'll be fine. Listen, have you seen the market cap of Zoom nowadays?
Yes, but you are at Harvard. Harvard is a name that people sort of recognize.
Yes, a little bit, I suppose, for good or for bad, right? But yes, you're right. But the thing about it is what he said was that the book was a helpful blueprint for connection and trust. Two things that are crucial when you are in a remote environment. Guess what? There have been nearly 40 years, almost 50 years worth of research in this area. Remote work may be new for a lot of people, but it's not new.
No, as I told you, I'm a guy that put up a website in 1996. I think anybody that's walking around, I understand the need to explain to people exactly what you're explaining. I'm kind of the impatient guy, like been waiting for society to kind of go, yeah, well, of course the internet changed everything. Of course, all these apps and the phone that Steve Jobs put out, it all changed everything.
You and me both. We've been on the same wavelength for a long time.
Let me take you at a bigger picture issue, a little bit outside of remote work. I want to get at the word work for a moment. Here you are, you teach business administration at Harvard. Talk to me about students right now, because I think of, and now you're going to see where I go philosophically. If I think of the typical student in America right now, I think we're still a little bit on this track of you get really good grades, you study, you memorize everything. And the kids that memorize the best and have the highest SATs, they make their activities look the best, they're going to go to Harvard, okay? But when they go to Harvard, I tend to think their motivations after doing all that rote memorization to get into one of the best schools, to come be in your class, I don't guess, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I don't guess that the majority of them think that when they finish Harvard and they have that degree, which is the imprimatur of like, wow, this person has done a lot. And they have. I'm not knocking it. But it seems like the motivation is ultimately to get a job, as opposed to, you and I know so many of these tech giants, so many of these Silicon Valley guys, yes, some of them went to schools, but a lot of them kind of took a circuitous route where they dropped out or they did something funny, did something different. Speak to this issue of work and the typical student coming in. I do think it's interesting right now to think about the typical student.
Well, Michael, I think we are at a pivotal point when it comes to the typical student. As you may know, our MBA program, which is, I think, common across many MBA programs, our students are around 27 years old. That's kind of the average age. They come to HBS to sharpen skills, to shift careers, etc. And you're right, they've done everything right their entire careers. They've gotten the great grades, the high pressure jobs, the great mentoring, and all of those things. I do think that we're at a pivotal time where this generation is deeply interested in impact.
What do you mean by impact?
They want to make a difference in the world.
What do you mean by that? I'm going to push you. I want to know. What does that mean exactly?
Push me. I love it. Listen.
I don't know what that means.
I'll tell you what that means. They want to make a difference when it comes to issues like climate change. They want to make a difference when it comes to issues of inequality. They want to make a difference when it comes to issues of gender equity. I promise you, this is the kind of narrative that you hear from our students. And you will find that companies who have students in this kind of age range, the way to motivate them, the way to retain them is to help them see that the work that they're doing is making a difference, some kind of societal shift or change. This is the reality. No more are people just going through the educational system, going to the Harvards of the world in order to get that job. They also want to do entrepreneurial work. We have a center called iLabs, which is all about incubation, entrepreneurship for the entire Boston area. We create the conditions for people to be creative. There's a lot of mentoring and coaching, a lot of things that go on in our iLabs. The number of students who are spending time in iLabs trying to come up with the next important technological innovation is huge. So you'd be surprised. You'd be surprised.
Let me keep you at the impact thing again. I'm going to assume my audience is half and half. Let's assume liberal. Let's assume conservative. I would think almost every conservative listener would think, well, Tsedal just said that they have these impact things they want to go after, but it sounds political. In a way, I could see the conservative listener thinking, well, okay, a lot of HBS students, Harvard Business School students, have a particular political desire and they want to go chase that inside of their workplace, so to speak. Is that a fair way to look at it?
Not true.
Not true? Okay. Correct me.
Not true at all. Our students are Democrats and Republicans, non-affiliated. We have a very diverse group of students. We have a very international student body as well. In fact, 37% of our students come from other countries. When I say they want to make impact, they look at the world and they worry. Something happens in any part of the world, they're raising money, they're raising awareness. Our own students, when COVID hit last year, were mobilizing efforts with China to secure PPE for health workers in the US. Our students were doing that. This is not a political driven issue. This is a human issue. And this is the orientation. And I will tell you, we have both Republicans and non-Republicans at HBS. What we talk about, and I talk about this all the time, is that we need to honor the various perspectives and ensure that we're doing work that fulfills the mission of the Harvard Business School, is to develop leaders that make a difference in the world. That's the truth.
I don't disagree with the idea of making a difference. Obviously, I'm just pressing to try and get some of the shine off. And I'm not saying you're doing this on purpose, but
there's no shine, Michael. There's no shine.
Some of the shine off the jargon. So when somebody says they want to make an impact, these kids are at the Harvard Business School. They want to make money. Unless they don't want to make money, then something has dramatically changed. And you're at the tip of the spear. You can tell me that their motivations are far less about money. If that's true, I want to know.
It is true. Listen, I've never met a Harvard Business School student who came to me to say, I want to make money. If you want to make money, you can make money without agonizing about the world and wanting to engage. We have today a generation of students, this is the truth, who are deeply concerned about the world around them. Why? We are living a crisis after a crisis after a crisis after a crisis.
I'm laughing because I'm the American who's not been in America for 2 years. And I think the rest of the world is looking at America and saying America's losing its mind.
Well, that's true too. But crisis after crisis after crisis. We're sitting here watching Texas in horror, worried about our fellow Americans. I think that we have hit a time in our lives where people feel like they want to do more, they want to be more, that they want to participate and engage. We're very clear. Our students know, and they know because we all say it, we feel it, and we model it. They know that they have a lot of privilege. They know that they have a responsibility. These are not talking points, Michael. This is real. The world has been on fire. Our students and my colleagues want to be part of the solution.
You guys got to come over to Saigon and chill out with me for a little while, get a little bit of Zen. The American way needs a little Buddhism or something to kind of calm everybody down. Okay,
I agree.
Listen, we'll do a follow-up conversation where we literally get into this discussion of students and the mindset, because I think that could be really fun. You and I could probably have a really good banter about that alone, but I want to keep you at your book more. I want to talk about opportunities first. I would love for you to kind of stimulate me, because you've done a hell of a lot of research. You know a lot of people. Stimulate me with some of the imagined opportunities and how the remote workplace will change us all beyond what I currently know right now. What do you see coming down the pike in terms of our collaboration using these tools beyond some of the things we've talked about right now?
Yes. This is, in fact, a very common question for organizations who are right now thinking about the policies, the guidelines that they want to put in place for this remote work revolution. Even thinking about real estate, you started with this question of real estate. I've talked to many organizations that are saying, goodness, if we change our numbers, what is it going to mean for our incredibly expensive real estate across the country? What do we do with those? Big questions.
Keep it at that for a moment. I was going to ask you about that, because that might be the biggest issue. If we go this remote way, companies don't have to have all this crazy space. They don't have to turn the lights on. I hope everyone listening understands what happens to the value of real estate if all of a sudden all of this real estate is not being used, especially commercial real estate, which is often valued a little bit differently. Speak to the real estate valuation issue. I'm sure you've looked at it in detail.
Listen, it's already happening. There are many companies that are announcing that they're going to shift either their locations, provided that when your lease is up or when it's time for you to make a move, saying things like, we're not going to be in Manhattan anymore because we find that we don't need to. We're going to ask 3,000 of our people to work remotely from now on, and we're going to have hoteling. Remember hoteling back in the day? That's coming back in a big way. So from a real estate standpoint, there are two things to keep in mind. One is remote work cannot be imposed. It has to be selected by employees, meaning companies need to get a sense, do a pulse check, and figure out who wants remote, who doesn't want remote.
You don't think they can impose it?
When you impose it, if people don't want the remote work or they don't have, very important, the home conditions to accommodate remote work, meaning either home is too noisy, don't have the appropriate space. Three of us are sharing a home in the middle of San Francisco. There's just not enough space for us to comfortably work. There are a number of conditions that make the remote format optimal for people. And if those don't exist, it's problematic. We have 8 kids, we just can't work from home. There are different things that affect people. What we've learned through 30 years worth of research is you have to give people the option whether they do remote work or not. So you need to understand who wants it. And you've got to make sure that you've changed your culture and your organization to give people the autonomy, another important condition for remote work to be effective, and leaders and managers to develop skills around not only motivating, but fully trusting people that they don't see. Managers are having a hard time, Michael.
I hope you don't mind me pushing you. I guess you know where I'm sitting right now. I'm looking out the window at a bright, colorful city at nighttime. It's something where when you start to, at least from my perspective, when I start to look around at this part of the world, for example, in India, et cetera, it just could happen very quickly. I can imagine, to where employees might want to have these choices. But if the bosses, so to speak, if they realize they have choices that are remote outside of America, maybe the people in America that want to have everything lined up exactly how they want it, maybe they're not going to have the same choice if all of a sudden they're competing with the rest of the world.
I think there's a transition period that companies have to go through and are going through now. I am giving you a snapshot of what's happening, not in a sense painting a picture that we want to see or otherwise. It's just providing the snapshot, which, as academics, that's part of what we do. The reality is they are grappling with what do we do and how do we do this? And part of it is you need to understand what your workforce is looking for and how can you transition to that place. Is this something then that will affect our real estate in a year's time, in 2 years' time? You've got to have a transition period.
What do you think about the real estate? What are we facing? I mean, if we're going down the path that you've spent your career doing all this research, getting behind the scenes, we can clearly see the trend.
It's happening now.
Okay, as you mentioned, we're maybe it's a transitional period, or have we fallen off the cliff already?
We're going to fall off the cliff if we don't accelerate and meet the moment, honestly.
But on real estate, what can we do? And ultimately, if the value of real estate goes down, let's take it a step further. The local tax situation, property taxes, et cetera. I mean, the local economies just get hit. I mean, the local governments just get cleaned out. If that real estate value changes, you know where I'm going.
You know what I think is going to happen, though? I think there's going to be a redistribution of populations.
A repurposing of buildings, perhaps?
A repurposing of buildings. From a residential standpoint, right now, Boston is actually, there are more available spots than there are people renting them for the first time in I don't know how long, because students are learning remotely. They don't need to be in the city. But once I think COVID is under control, vaccinations are well underway, what I can imagine is that someone can work from Boston and have a job in Washington, D.C., no problem. I think there's just going to be a redistribution of population and geographies in a way that we right now can't quite imagine. You're in Saigon. I wouldn't mind working from Hawaii. I think things will just need to settle as soon as companies map out the guidelines and the policies for their, and I'm calling it not just remote work, future of work. Because there's one more thing we haven't talked about that's critically important in all of this. COVID, as we've talked about, has accelerated the virtualization of work, as I mentioned. But we've also seen a digital advancement, not transformation, but advancement in many companies. So I think digital, data, devices, all of those things put together, AI, machine learning, are actually going to force all of us to shift what we do, how we do, the things that we do, understand our consumers differently, and begin to adopt more data-driven decisions in all that we do, which will impact, I think, most professions.
I have a family member who installed a security system with a well-known security system. They've got cameras outside their house and whatnot, and gave me access. On my Apple TV, I can flip up at any point in time remotely from 8,000 miles away and see live 4 cameras. There's just a great little digital example right there. I want to keep one thing, though, one more point, and just pretend it's me and you talking. No one else is possibly listening. I want to really know what you can imagine to the value of commercial real estate. If your full imagination of remote work happens, tell me how real estate and the commercial sector goes up if all of what you are talking about happens.
I think a combination of things.
That was so diplomatic. Oh my God, that was so diplomatic.
Listen, I'm a case method teacher. I'm surprised I'm answering any questions. Listen, here's the thing. It's going to be a combination of things. And this is imagination, like pure imagination. An entire building that is dedicated to one company may no longer exist. We might see a shared commercial building in downtown X, people doing this hoteling in more places than just 1 or 2 or 3 key expensive spots. Commercial real estate may be accessible to the smaller companies where they do their hoteling. I think there's going to be a redistribution of work and population that's going to affect real estate. I'm not saying that these companies are going to completely be devalued and not going to work. That's an impossibility. I live in Boston, Massachusetts, where real estate costs have been and continue to be insane. And in fact, what I imagine is some of the downtown Boston buildings that are not being used now may be used much more intensely by many more players rather than disappearing. I just think that the big real estate cost, the burden that many companies have had, will not be the same. I think that's going to shrink. If we're moving to a hybrid workforce, meaning some are working from home some days, some are working at the office, there's this coming and going that I imagine is going to be the future. I think companies are going to want to have some kind of hoteling presence. More companies are going to do that. So I don't think the real estate market is going to disappear as we know it. I think it's going to evolve and change, and more people might have access to more real estate and smaller footprints.
Let me throw something out. Again, I'm just using my own personal experience. So I'm a little bit ahead of the curve, and so are you. I've owned many houses over the years in the States. I don't currently now. My last house I sold in 2018. I think I've learned something here about home ownership. We're sold this story in America, and maybe we're sold this story all around the world, but now there is a way that when you understand remote and one understands wealth and one understands moving around, owning a home is very akin to a straitjacket, an anvil, anything you can imagine that it's just holding you down. It will be interesting to see as this remote thing unfolds, and maybe I'm ahead of the curve or maybe I'm just strange, I don't know. Will people detether from the concept of being in a fixed home? Once you start to jump around, once you realize that it's not that important, you could sleep anywhere around the world. There's a nice place to stay. If you've got a few extra bucks in your pocket, you could stay anywhere. That's the Airbnb concept.
That is the Airbnb concept. It's funny because if you listen to our friends at Airbnb, they are talking about this population redistribution that they've been seeing throughout this last year, where people are staying in different parts of the world and working in different parts of the cities away from their homes. But I'm not convinced that real estate and wealth building through real estate intergenerationally is going to go away. But I do think that mobility is going to increase. So why didn't you rent out your place, Michael? Let me push you a little.
No, I did.
Oh, you did? So you didn't sell?
No, I was living all around. I owned these places and I was renting them out for like 15 plus years. I reached the point where it was like, okay, there's some profit there, whatever, walk away. But I think it's once you walk away, then you realize, oh, you're like, wow, was that really needed? It's one of those things they just don't teach you on the way to wherever we're going in our life, because there is that typical American dream. Get the house, the white picket fence, 2.5 kids, 2.5 cars, the whole thing, right? Let me keep you a little bit more focused on your new book coming out. Let's talk about challenges. I would think the typical, you've already said this, but I want you to go into a little bit more. The typical employer is thinking, well, typical might not be necessarily correct. Silicon Valley is going to look at this different, but we've got people now remotely. How do we keep track of them? How do we trust them? I mean, do we make them use the company laptop, screen monitoring, security stuff? Some companies, I'm sure, are doing that. It makes people probably feel not so good. What is the best way that you do this monitoring or this process of building trust when, frankly, like you said, COVID, okay, we're here and now we jumped the shark and we're over here. We didn't really have time to build up this trust paradigm that needs to exist for these kinds of worlds to function correctly.
Yes, yes, yes. You are right. These, what they call them, awareness technologies or monitoring technologies, their businesses are going through the roof, which is so unfortunate. This is monitoring where people are clicking or their desktops or whether it's awful. Some are being asked to put some GPS on their phones. It's just terrible. Why is it terrible? It backfires. It humiliates people. It is anti-remote work. It is literally the worst thing that you can do. Here's the thing. Leaders, managers, and organizations have to focus on outcome versus process, meaning they've got to help and equip people to make sure that they have everything that they need in order to be successful. No longer can you have the type of scenario where you can see what people are doing. You can see who they're talking to. Focus on
what do they deliver?
Exactly. When assessing productivity. But you must equip people, the tools that they need, the resources that they need, the insights that they might need to achieve their work, and then you step away. The other thing is you need to lean into the inherent flexibility of the remote format. Instead of monitoring team members obsessively, you have to encourage autonomy. Autonomy helps people gain confidence, agency, efficiency, and people are more productive when they are given autonomy. This is a fact. I'm talking about empirical evidence. People have to let go. The other thing is you have to emphasize team goals and identity. This is one of the biggest problems, actually. You talked about challenges. It's this issue of being out of sight, potentially out of sync, and out of touch. A leader's job is to keep the remote team members aligned with one another on their shared goals to ensure that individuals can actually contribute. This thing about flex time, it's so important. Flex time is the gift that remote gives, which is people to be able to cut up their workday in a way that's efficient for them. Of course, they have to make sure that they honor the overlapping times that they need for the collaborations and the meetings and the things that you need to do together. But what if I worked from 6 a.m. to 9 in the morning, exercised for an hour and a half, well, maybe 40 minutes, and then went back to my work?
And this is my life. You're describing me.
Oh, I love that. I love your life. Like, I really love your life. That you're in Saigon, literally the best thing ever. But that's what's called flex time. To insist that people maintain a particular schedule, 9 to 5, 8 to 4.
It's ridiculous.
Makes no sense.
It's ridiculous.
It makes no sense.
Worry about the output. If we stay focused on the process, you don't want people to have a bad process. And if they need help on developing a good process or they need some mentoring, okay. But ultimately, give people enough space to figure out their way to get it done and don't quibble over a minute here or a minute there. You know what I mean?
100%. Here's the thing. Here's some updates that things have gone to the other extreme, actually. The term hyperproductivity is what we're battling nowadays.
Who talks like that? Who uses that term?
Tsedal Neeley.
Oh, Troy Oi. Troy Oi is Vietnamese for oh my God. So, I forget to say oh my God, so I'm not saying Troy Oi.
Yeah, Troy. Listen, people get it. So hyperproductivity is where we are now, meaning that work and non-work lives are getting blurred. We know based on recent data where my colleagues Jeff Polzer and Rafaela Sandun actually surveyed up to 3 million people. This is a sample of 3 million and have found that people are working on average 6.8 hours more per week. Think about that, almost 7 hours more per week.
During COVID, you mean?
During COVID.
That's not good.
That's not good. This is why you have burnout. If you're looking around, you're seeing more and more articles about burnout emerging because people are working many more hours. They're not guarding the boundaries between home and work because what? You roll over, you take a shower, you sit. Your commute is literally a minute. Leaders and managers are not modeling and helping people with the boundaries. What's happened? People are becoming much more productive, their output much greater, while they themselves, as people, their physical and mental health declining. We need to battle this hyperproductivity and get people back into a more balanced track, which is why you hear Google and other companies that are asking people to take care of their well-being because burnout and stress is really entering our workforces. We need to avoid those.
Your point's well taken about the company's responsibility. I guess for the individual out there that's working for the company or the individual entrepreneur or whatnot, maybe there's somebody out there, maybe there's a company out there that can care for you or help you or whatnot on some of these time management issues or health and all that kind of stuff. Even though this has been an unfortunate situation where people were thrust into this, there is some personal responsibility here. Ultimately, even if people did not want this, they got to be careful. And America's already, look, I'm in the least obese country in the world. America's the most obese country in the world. I'm sure America's gotten bigger in the last year, not smaller. And I'm sure COVID has brought a lot of bad habits into the game that we probably are going to see in the health stats in the future. I would almost guarantee. This has surely hurt people big time on the health front.
I think you have a very good point there in terms of the fitness. But you know what else is growing in America? Remote fitness revolution. People are starting to set up their...
You sit in your big chair with the bucket of KFC and you watch the guy in the Peloton? What do you do?
Exactly. You're on the Peloton bike.
With the KFC bucket on the Peloton. I'm eating my burger and my KFC on the Peloton.
No, Michael. Okay. KFC comes later. Now, the people are setting up home gyms using various bands, and I'm staring at my elliptical machine. I never in life have worked out at home the way that I've been working out. It's always been the gym and outdoors, but suddenly we've all built whatever we can, weights and other things. If we were to draw this out during the pandemic, it was not. People were sitting too much, backs hurting, lots of issues, but people are starting to figure out their fitness routine, I think, more and more. But here's what I'll say, though. The thing about people need to take responsibility, there's another piece to this as well. In the last year, what have we seen? We've seen industries literally shut down. We've seen some companies go out of business, companies that have been around for decades. There's this thing called job insecurity. I want to show my worth. I need to work harder. I need to be productive. We've been in the middle of radical changes in many companies dealing with crises. So I think the reason people are working a ton is also to respond to the current affairs, but it's really important to bring it back down because this is a marathon, not a sprint, including remote work.
Well, you raise another issue there as you talk about the notion of the employer, the job, the individual having the job. And of course, you're talking to somebody who doesn't have the ability to relate to that concept anymore. And there are a lot of people out there like that. They've got the entrepreneurial mindset. They've figured out a way to slay their dinner, so to speak. They know how to do that, and they have figured that out. I would only wish on the entire world to have some experience at some point in their life, if they can, to experience that, because the feeling of that, the feeling of having somebody compensate you for something you did, it's a customer to you, that psychological feeling is indefinable, probably for the vast majority of people that have only held a job in their life. And I can only wish that everyone would have a chance in their lifetime to experience that, because I tend to think that the moment anybody experiences a customer paying them money for something they did, they made, they produced, they invented, etc., bell rung, can't ever go back to the job. It's over.
Wow. It's liberating, isn't it?
Of course it is. I mean, look, you're associated with Harvard right now, but you've probably got enough experience to where, and I don't know your full background in terms of what you've done, but you've probably got enough experience and enough know-how that if you wanted to be the independent consultant, you probably could. I mean, with your background, you've done enough work to where you've got that ability to do it. Obviously, you like to be with Harvard right now and you like to teach the kids and everything. So that's cool. I'm the person that's bringing every crazy lesson that you don't want to let into the classroom, right?
I know.
You don't want to let a crazy person like me into your classroom.
You're a troublemaker.
Exactly.
My goodness.
But I'm nice. I'm not mean.
No, I love it.
I'm good at finding whatever it is on the table. Everyone's got a perspective. People can do it to me, but whoever perspective has got on the table, all I want to do is, what's the weak point? What's the Achilles heel? Let's find the Achilles heel and find what the problem is here. And then we start to have the real conversation.
The thing about it is, I think where you are, we're probably similarly aged. We're peers in that way.
I'm only 19. What are you talking about?
Me too. I do think that we all have our career journeys. We all have our sense of responsibilities, family-wise. Some of us are part of the sandwich generation where we're worried about our parents and we're raising small children, lots of pressures around there. But I do think that the message that you're sending around this entrepreneurial mindset is really important, or even in thinking about real estate and attachment and things like that. When we at the Harvard Business School think about our curriculum, and I'm the head of one of the required courses in the fall called Leadership and Organizational Behavior that we team teach with about 8 people, meaning 8 of us teach this year 750 students. Next year, we'll be back to probably 950 to 1,000 of our students. We make sure that we end the course thinking about our whole lives and the whole person, and what kind of life that we want to intentionally author. At the end of the day, we need to do it deliberately, intentionally, and understand what defines success for us. And it differs. What success is for one person could be very different for another person. And it changes based on whether you're an international person with various experiences or not, your biographical background, et cetera. But I do believe that at the end of the day, we have to be very deliberate about what that is and live the life that we're meant to live. And I think I am living the life that I'm meant to live as a teacher.
If any more of these COVID black swans swim in to bite us, our best laid plans, we've sometimes got to adjust very quickly when something like a COVID happens. And it sure looks like to me that remnants of COVID are going to go on. I hate to say this, but it's starting to look like remnants of COVID are going to go on like remnants of 9/11 went on. That's what it feels like to me. And it's unfortunate.
I think the world has changed forever. This idea of going back to something. The CEO of Solomon recently said that he thinks remote work is an aberration. We are going back to the old normal. Not true. Not true. Not true.
You are 100% correct.
We've changed. The world has changed. Either we adapt or we will find ourselves in trouble. We are not going back to the old normal. No way. The world has changed.
The book, Remote Work Revolution, Succeeding from Anywhere. I hope this is a very typical conversation for you.
It is. Typical from the standpoint of hoping to push boundaries in our thinking, but atypical in how much I enjoyed it. Thank you so much for having me today.
Hey, thanks for coming on.
I love talking to you.
Where can we send people, Tsedal? Where would you like to direct them? They can find you at Harvard and all that kind of fun stuff. The book on Amazon. Is there a personal website you would like to direct people to?
I do. If you can spell my first name, which is T as in Tom, Sedal. My website is Tsedal.com. My Twitter handle is @Tsedal. LinkedIn, Tsedal Neeley. I'm actually very, very easy to find. Finally, the strange first name has paid off.
I've got my last name as Twitter. I've got Covel, which is shortened from Coveleski, shortened from Kovalauskis. So I've actually have my @Covel on Twitter. So there's a few of us out there that actually have part of our name on Twitter. We got lucky, huh?
I know, so lucky. I'm going to look you up.
There's not that much going on there. It's just me being a little bit. Hey, listen, I appreciate you coming on. I took you off on a tangent there in the middle, a little bit talking about wants and desires and where people are headed and all that kind of stuff. But I think that's heavy, important stuff. I sometimes think the American dream and what we say we're doing becomes these rubber stamp ideals. And then if we look around and say, well, is it really taking place? Is it really happening? Well, that's a whole different conversation.
Totally. But one thing you're doing that I'm a true believer in as a global scholar is that you're living and immersing yourself in a different perspective that gives you full view of yourself and the world. This relative comparison is powerful, and it's a lesson that we all need to take.
I'm living in a country where America killed 4 million people in the 60s and 70s. Do you know how many people in 8 years have said something to me? 0. Do you know how many of them seem to care? 0. Do you know how many people are nice to me? Everyone.
Wow. That's amazing. That's amazing.
Cool stuff. Tsedal, good chatting. We'll do it again in the future.
Look forward to it. Take care, Michael.
I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.